The Effects of Visual Cues on Memory Capacity by Andy Leff, Kayla Morrissey, and Maggie Remus.
Hello. Today we are going to talk to you about the effects of visual cues on memory capacity. The experiment we performed focuses on short-term memory, which is a person's capacity for holding a small amount of information in the mind that is readily available. The average short-term memory can hold anywhere between 5 to 9 items for around 15 to 30 seconds. This means that the longer time you spend or larger amount of things you try to remember, the more information you will be able to retain and recall. Recall is the action of remembering something learned or experienced. Recall becomes easier when using techniques such as chunking or association. Chunking involves organizing items from a sequence into smaller groups to facilitate memory. Association is the act of being able to relate one thing to another to help retain information. In our experiment, both these techniques were relevant because our participants were exposed to situations in which chunking was always available and in which association was either available or not.
Our experimental question fueling our research was, how do different visual cues affect a person's short-term memory?
We hypothesized two ideas based on previous research. Our first was, if the buttons are colored, then the mean total number of buttons remembered will be larger than if the buttons were gray. The second was, if the speed is slow, then the mean total number of remembered buttons will be larger than if the speed was fast.
Next, we will discuss our methods for data collection and analysis. We asked for permission from participants randomly sampled from Math 209 statistics classes at Grinnell College. We then proctored a memory game in which the participants recalled a sequence of flashing lights. Each participant played the game 4 times with different settings. The order in which participants played each game was randomized. Data was obtained and stored through a group ID set at the beginning of the experiment.
To analyze our data, we used a two-way ANOVA test. Our response variable was the total number of buttons clicked by the participant. Our experimental variables were speed at levels of fast 300 milliseconds and slow 700 milliseconds, and color with levels of multicolor and gray. We used the natural log of total number of buttons clicked to minimize our standard deviations. 5 data points were deleted due to mechanical and procedural errors. 4 of the points were due to the explanation of the game being confusing to participants. 1 data point, there was a glitch in the game where the light did not flash.
Here are the results of our two-way ANOVA test. We included the student ID variable to ensure that there was no significant difference between the individual participants. We found there to be a significant difference between the level of speed, with a p-value of 0.022. For the effects of color and the interaction of color and speed, we found there to be no significant difference, with p-values of 0.49 and 0.47 respectively.
Here is a box plot that depicts the comparison of means of total buttons clicked between multicolor and gray. This graph also shows the means for our 2 speeds within the category of color. This graph of the means depicts that there was little variance in the means between color and a large variance between the means of speed within one color. This makes sense since our ANOVA test concluded that there was no significant difference between color and a significant difference between speed. We chose this graph in order to show the variance in our data.
This graph shows the interaction between speed and color. This graph shows the same trends as the previous graph, however, it better demonstrates a possible interaction that occurred between speed and color. This interaction may have been significant had we conducted the experiment on a larger sample of participants. We chose this graph to better demonstrate the interaction that may not have been able to be seen with raw data.
Gender was a lurking variable in our experiment, so in order to account for any effects it may have had on our data, we analyzed it and the results determined that it was insignificant. Thus, we ignored it given that it had no impact on our results. We found that color did not make a difference in recalling the sequences. We found this surprising because we thought participants would be able to use association with colors to help them remember the sequences. We think that because we only used 5 buttons, this may have been a factor as to why color did not make a difference. If there were a larger number of buttons, color would have made a difference. With a larger number of buttons, it would make it harder to remember the order, so association would act as a visual cue to the participant. Speed, however, did have a significant impact on the total number of buttons remembered, and from the graphs, we determined that the slower speed proved more beneficial for remembering a long sequence. This was expected because the slower speed exposes the participants to the sequences for a longer amount of time, making it easier for them to remember the sequence.
We have decided that this study is generalizable for students aged 14 to 28. This age range is similar to our participants, but extended a little because people in this range have similar short-term memory capacity. Younger and older people often have smaller short-term memories. We also believe that our sample size was fairly small. Although our p-value was significant for our sample size, we think that if we had had a larger sample size, we could have shown stronger associations, and we could have possibly found an interaction between the other variables. Future studies that could be conducted could look to determine an optimal speed for recall. These tests would be helpful for teaching foreign language programs in classrooms or for listening-based learning tools like Rosetta Stone. If an optimal speed was determined, then instructors could speak at this pace and help increase the amount of retained information. Our results are also applicable to textbook designs and other learning materials. Since we found no significant difference in memory based on color, textbooks may discover they don't have to print everything in color, and this could save a lot of money.
In conclusion, we found our first hypothesis to be incorrect, as color did not have an impact on sequence memory. Our second hypothesis was supported, as speed did have a significant effect on a person's ability to remember a sequence. For future repetitions of this experiment, we have a few corrections that would improve the experiment and make it more powerful. A larger sample size with a larger age variance between the age range of 14 to 28 would be beneficial. Also, we determined that the explanation of the game can be confusing. So for future repetitions, it would help to have a set explanation of the game and have only one person explain the game to each participant. A quieter, more professional setting would have created an environment more conducive to memory, because participants could have been distracted by various noises or conversations going on in the lab that the experiment was conducted in.
Listed below are our references. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed.